Earth's cities were once symbols of human progress, shining beacons of innovation and unity. Now they're nothing but rubble. The alien warlords descended without warning, their machines darkening the skies, their weapons turning towering buildings to ash in seconds. New York fell first, its skyline reduced to craters. Tokyo didn't last much longer, vaporized in a fiery blast that left no survivors. In less than a month, the world's greatest cities were all but erased, and the survivors were scattered, hiding like animals. Humanity had never faced anything like this before. The alien warlords didn't communicate, they didn't offer ultimatums or make demands. They simply attacked, crushing everything in their path. Their technology was beyond anything Earth scientists could comprehend, hovering fortresses armed with weapons that could tear through mountains, legions of robotic soldiers that operated with cold precision, and towering war machines that moved with terrifying ease, flattening whatever remained of human civilization. As the weeks went by, the human resistance, however brave, was futile. The combined military forces of Earth launched every weapon they had: nuclear strikes, EMP blasts, cyber warfare, all of it met with failure. The warlords' defenses were impenetrable. Earth's leaders were forced underground, hiding in remote bunkers while the alien invaders systematically wiped out what was left of humanity's infrastructure. Communication networks went down, governments collapsed, and cities became graveyards. The aliens didn't just want to conquer, they wanted total annihilation. In one of those hidden bunkers, deep beneath the remains of what had once been Washington, D.C., a group of scientists, historians, and military leaders huddled together, poring over ancient texts and military strategies, desperate for anything that could turn the tide. They had exhausted every scientific option, every piece of military tech. Nothing could touch the warlords. Humanity was cornered, and in that corner, they turned to the one thing they had left: myths. An aging historian, thin and frail, his face lined with the weight of years and despair, spoke up during one of their final meetings. His voice was weak, almost drowned out by the low hum of the bunker's power generators. But what he said silenced the room. "There's a legend," he began, his voice wavering. "The Headless Horseman. An ancient spirit bound to this world, summoned in times of desperate need. If we can bring him back, we might stand a chance." The room was silent for a moment, the sound of distant explosions from above rumbling through the walls. The Horseman? A story, a legend. But what else did they have? Every rational option had failed. Perhaps the irrational was their last hope. The military officers in the room exchanged glances, their skepticism clear. But the scientists, some of whom had already dabbled in unconventional warfare, nodded. If they could combine ancient mysticism with modern technology, maybe, just maybe, they could summon this mythical figure. The historian's face was drawn, his eyes dark with a mix of fear and determination. They didn't have time to question legends. The decision was made. Desperate measures for desperate times. There was nothing to lose. They worked quickly, piecing together fragments of ancient texts, runes, and rituals passed down through generations. The scientists rigged up technology to amplify the mystical process, using advanced energy conductors and quantum resonators. They fused what they knew of the physical world with what little they understood of the supernatural. The ritual was dangerous, and even the historians were unsure if it would work, but in the face of extinction, caution no longer mattered. The moment arrived. Deep beneath the Earth's surface, far from the eyes of the alien invaders, they began. The bunker was filled with the low hum of machines and the soft chanting of the ritual's words, echoing off the metal walls. Lights flickered as energy surged through the cables, and the air in the room grew thick, heavy with anticipation and something else, something ancient. The ground trembled. The lights went out. For a moment, everything was silent. Then, a cold wind swept through the room, and in the center of the ritual circle, he appeared. The Headless Horseman. A towering figure, cloaked in black armor that shimmered with an otherworldly sheen. His headless form was as terrifying as the legends had described, his broad shoulders and muscular frame casting long shadows against the bunker walls. In his hand he wielded a massive, flaming axe, its blade glowing with a dark, fiery light. His horse, a spectral steed, stood beside him, its eyes burning with the same unholy flame. The humans in the room stood frozen, caught between awe and terror. The horseman made no sound, but his presence was palpable, an overwhelming force that seemed to drain the warmth from the room. His headless form moved with purpose, his body language communicating more than words ever could. He was bound to the earth, summoned to protect it. One of the generals, trembling slightly, stepped forward. "Will he fight for us?" The words were more a plea than a question. The horseman didn't respond. Instead, he mounted his steed, the ethereal horse rearing back with a soundless cry, and in a blur of motion, they vanished, disappearing into the shadows as if they had never been there. But the humans knew. The legend was real. The Headless Horseman had been summoned, and Earth had just unleashed its most terrifying weapon. The horseman was gone as quickly as he had appeared, leaving the bunker in stunned silence. The scientists and military leaders had expected something, anything, but what they had summoned was beyond comprehension. Still, they had no choice but to trust in the legend. They sent out drones and scouts, trying to track where the horseman had gone, hoping to witness what he could do. It didn't take long. Just outside one of the last human outposts, a small scouting unit encountered an alien patrol. The aliens were methodical, moving through the wreckage of a once bustling city, searching for any human survivors. Their robotic troops, covered in sleek black armor, marched forward in perfect formation, their sensors scanning for movement. They had grown used to Earth's resistance, weak, disorganized, easy to crush. Then, without warning, the temperature dropped. The alien sensors went haywire, detecting nothing but an inexplicable presence. Their formations broke, their precision faltering as confusion spread through their ranks. And in that moment, from the shadows, the horseman appeared. It was almost too fast for the drones to capture. 1 second, the aliens were advancing, and the next, their forces were being torn apart. The horseman moved like a phantom, silent, swift, his flaming axe cutting through alien armor like it was nothing. His spectral horse galloped through the air, unhindered by physical obstacles, as though reality bent to accommodate him. The aliens' energy shields, so impenetrable to Earth's weapons, flickered and failed in the presence of the horseman. His axe cleaved through their technology as if it were made of paper. The surviving drones caught only glimpses of the carnage. The aliens had no chance to defend themselves. Their plasma weapons fired wildly, but the horseman was untouchable, fading into the shadows only to strike again from a different angle. In minutes, the patrol was decimated. Nothing remained but smoldering wreckage and a few scattered pieces of alien machinery. The horseman had vanished once more, leaving no trace of where he had gone, but his impact was undeniable. Back at the human bunker, the leaders watched the footage in disbelief. They had hoped for a weapon, but what they had summoned was more than that. It was a force of nature. The horseman didn't just destroy the aliens, he instilled fear. The Warlords, who had crushed Earth's cities without mercy, now faced something they couldn't understand. They had faced human resistance before, primitive, ineffective, easily overcome. But this was different. The generals knew they had to strike while the aliens were off balance. If the horseman could cause this much damage to a small patrol, what could he do against a full invasion force? The decision was made to send him into a larger engagement, something that would test his power further. The first target was an alien outpost, a heavily fortified base controlling one of the few remaining city ruins. This outpost was crucial for the alien warlords' operations, a command center from which they directed their armies and communicated with their warships in orbit. It was protected by energy barriers and guarded by the most advanced war machines the invaders had. The human forces had tried and failed to breach it before, losing hundreds of lives in the process. But this time, they had the horseman. A small team of human scouts accompanied him, though they knew their role was minimal. The plan was simple: get the horseman close enough to the base and let him do what he did best. The scouts, hidden in the shadows, watched as the horseman approached the outpost. There was no hesitation, no fear in his movements. He was a weapon, and he knew exactly what needed to be done. As he neared the outpost, the alien sensors detected him, and alarms blared through the alien ranks. Their defensive turrets swiveled toward the approaching figure, their energy weapons charging up. The Horseman didn't stop. The first barrage of plasma fire slammed into him, but it was as if the energy itself bent around him, dissipating into the air. His horse reared back, its hooves glowing with spectral light, and then they were inside the base's defenses. Chaos erupted. The Horseman's axe was a blur, cutting through machines, soldiers, and barricades with the same effortless motion. Energy shields, designed to repel any form of physical or technological attack, crumbled before the Horseman's spectral presence. The aliens, who had fought without fear or hesitation against humanity's best, now faced something beyond their understanding. They faltered, retreating, their machines failing as the Horseman tore through them. He moved with the same terrifying speed and precision, slipping in and out of shadows, his attacks coming from every direction. The outpost, which had stood as an unbreakable stronghold for weeks, was falling apart in minutes. Even the Warlords' most advanced weapons couldn't touch him. Their attempts to fight back were futile, every strike missed, every defense crumbled. And then, just as suddenly as it began, it was over. The outpost was in ruins, its command center reduced to rubble, its defenders either dead or fleeing in terror. The Horseman stood amidst the wreckage, his axe still glowing with that dark, fiery light. He paused, as if waiting for more enemies to strike, but there were none left. The alien warlords had underestimated him, and now they were paying the price. The human scouts, still hidden, watched in awe as the Horseman turned and rode into the distance, disappearing into the shadows once more. The destruction he left behind was absolute. What had once seemed like an impenetrable fortress was now nothing more than a smoking ruin, and the humans knew this was just the beginning. The footage of the attack spread quickly through the remaining human outposts. Morale, which had been at an all-time low, surged. For the first time since the invasion began, humanity had a weapon the aliens couldn't counter. The Warlords, who had once seemed invincible, now faced a force they couldn't predict, couldn't control, and most importantly, couldn't stop. The tide had finally turned. Word spread fast. Humanity wasn't defenseless anymore. The fear that had gripped Earth's survivors began to loosen, replaced by something new, hope. The alien warlords, once believed to be unstoppable, were now vulnerable. Their machines and technology had no answer for the Horseman, a force that defied all logic and science. It wasn't long before the human leadership planned their next move, a direct assault on one of the warlords' main strongholds. They weren't just fighting to survive anymore. They were ready to take the fight back to their invaders. The stronghold they chose to attack was nestled in what remained of one of Earth's most iconic cities. It had once been a beacon of human achievement, now reduced to little more than ash and ruins. The aliens had built their command center there, towering spires of cold, alien metal rising from the rubble. It was the nerve center of their operations, where the warlords coordinated their final push to wipe out the last remnants of human resistance. Taking it down would cripple their entire strategy, giving humanity a chance to reorganize and regroup. This time, the humans didn't go in blindly. The Horseman was their spearhead, but they needed more than just raw power, they needed a plan. Human scouts had gathered intel on the stronghold's defenses, noting the heavily armored sentinels that patrolled its perimeter, and the automated turrets scanning for intruders. Every inch of the fortress was covered by overlapping fields of fire, with energy barriers protecting the central command tower. It was an alien fortress in every sense of the word, fortified, cold, and impossible for any conventional force to breach. But the Horseman wasn't conventional. The operation began under cover of darkness. The Horseman emerged from the shadows, moving like a phantom toward the fortress. His horse galloped silently across the ruined landscape, its hooves never touching the ground. The human forces followed from a distance, watching through binoculars and drones, ready to support the assault. The Horseman was their vanguard, their unstoppable weapon, but they had learned to adapt. They knew now how to work with him, using his terrifying presence to cover their own movements. The first wave of alien sentinels moved in to intercept. Massive, hulking machines, their armor reinforced with the strongest alloys the Warlords possessed. Each one stood nearly 3 stories tall, armed with heavy plasma cannons capable of leveling buildings. They advanced with the slow, deliberate movements of machines built for destruction, their weapons charging up as they closed in on the lone rider. But the Horseman wasn't just powerful, he was swift. He moved between them like a shadow, his flaming axe cleaving through their armor as if it were nothing. Plasma blasts lit up the night, but none found their mark. The Horseman danced between the shots, always one step ahead, always just out of reach. One by one, the sentinels fell, collapsing into piles of burning scrap metal. The alien warlords had underestimated him before, and now their finest machines were being reduced to nothing more than debris. The destruction continued as the Horsemen moved deeper into the fortress. The automated turrets tracked him, their energy blasts cutting through the air, but it was as if he existed outside of their reach. He rode through the barrage with eerie calm, his axe cutting through energy barriers and reinforced walls alike. Nothing could stop him. The command center, once thought untouchable, was now exposed. Alien forces scrambled to regroup, but their discipline faltered. Fear spread through their ranks. This was no longer a conventional battle. It was a nightmare they couldn't wake from. Inside the command tower, the alien warlords watched in horror. Their screens showed the Horseman's progress as he tore through their defenses with terrifying ease. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. They had planned for every scenario, every contingency, but they had never imagined this. The warlords, so used to victory, were paralyzed by fear. For the first time since the invasion began, they understood what it meant to face a force beyond their control. They tried to coordinate a counterattack, ordering more troops to the front lines, but it was already too late. The Horseman reached the base of the command tower, and the final phase of the battle began. Human forces moved in behind him, taking advantage of the chaos he had created. With the sentinels destroyed and the defenses in disarray, they advanced on the tower's lower levels, engaging the remaining alien troops. Plasma rifles fired back and forth as the humans pushed their way in, but the battle had already been decided. The Horsemen had broken the alien spirit, and now the humans were cleaning up the rest. In the heart of the command tower, the Horsemen confronted the warlords. These beings, once so imposing, now cowered before him. They had seen countless worlds fall before their might, but none had resisted like Earth. None had summoned something like this. The warlords, with their advanced technology and superior tactics, had no answer for a force born from Earth's oldest legends. The Horseman moved without hesitation, his axe cutting through the warlords' final defenses. In moments, their reign of terror was over. With the command center in ruins and the warlords dead, the remaining alien forces fled. The invasion had collapsed. Earth wasn't just fighting back anymore, it had won. The Horsemen, their mysterious and terrifying weapon, had done what no human army could. He had broken the invaders, shattered their will, and turned the tide of the war. But as the humans began to celebrate their victory, a question lingered in the minds of those who had summoned the Horseman. He had served them well, but he wasn't a being bound by loyalty or gratitude. He was a force unto himself, an ancient entity brought forth in a time of need. And now that the need was fulfilled, what would he do next? The Horseman stood among the wreckage of the command tower, his axe still glowing with unearthly fire. His mission was complete, but he remained. For now, he was humanity's greatest ally, their savior in their darkest hour. But the humans watching from the shadows couldn't help but wonder, had they unleashed something even more dangerous than the warlords? The battle was over. The alien warlords were defeated, their stronghold shattered, and their forces scattered across the ruins of Earth. What had once seemed like an unbreakable invasion had crumbled in the face of something beyond their comprehension. For the first time since the war began, there was a sense of relief. Humanity had survived. People emerged from hiding, the survivors venturing out from their bunkers and safe houses to see the aftermath. The invaders, who had once darkened the skies with their ships and reduced cities to ashes, were retreating. But amidst the tentative celebrations, an uneasy silence settled over those who had summoned the Headless Horseman. The cost of victory was beginning to sink in. The horseman had done what no human weapon could, had struck fear into an enemy that was thought to be invincible. But now that the warlords were gone, there was no clear sense of what came next. The horseman still walked the earth, a spectral figure bound by something ancient and unknowable. The scientists, historians, and military leaders who had brought him back realized they had no control over him. In the aftermath of the battle, they began to search for answers. The rituals they had used were obscure, pieced together from fragments of ancient texts. The historians had warned that bringing the horseman into the world was dangerous, but no one had truly understood what that danger meant. They had been so focused on survival that they hadn't considered what might happen after. Now, with the alien threat seemingly over, the implications were becoming all too clear. The horseman had no master. He had been summoned to fight an enemy, but that enemy was gone. What would he do now? Could he be banished? Contained? Or was he a force that would continue on, indifferent to the fate of those who had called him forth? These questions haunted the minds of those in charge, but there were no easy answers. The texts were vague, the legends incomplete. The one thing they knew for certain was that the horseman was not a servant to be dismissed. At first, the horseman seemed to vanish, retreating into the shadows as he had so many times before. Days passed with no sign of him, and some began to hope that perhaps he had simply returned to whatever realm he had come from. But that hope didn't last long. Reports began to trickle in from survivors across the war-torn regions. People spoke of seeing the horseman in the distance, riding through the ruins of destroyed cities. He didn't attack, didn't engage with the survivors, but his presence was impossible to ignore. It was as if he was patrolling the lands, a ghostly figure watching over what remained of Earth. Some saw this as a good sign. They believed that the horseman was still protecting them, ensuring that the alien invaders would never return. But others weren't so sure. The horseman had been summoned in desperation, and his power was undeniable, but he was not human. His motivations, his purpose, were beyond their understanding. And if he wasn't tied to the alien warlords anymore, what was he tied to? The uneasy peace began to fracture. The military wanted to find a way to control the horseman, to ensure he wouldn't become a threat. But no one knew how to do that. They had brought him into the world, but they had no way to send him back. And the more they looked into the rituals they had used, the more they realized just how little they had understood. There were warnings in the texts, cryptic passages about the dangers of summoning such a force, but nothing concrete. Nothing that could help them now. The horseman continued his silent patrols, appearing and disappearing without warning. There was no pattern to his movements, no clear sense of what he was doing. Some believed he was hunting the last remnants of the alien forces, ensuring that none would escape. Others feared that he was simply biding his time, waiting for a new enemy to emerge, or perhaps creating one in his own mind. Tensions rose. In the face of an uncertain future, human leaders argued over what to do. Could they risk leaving the horseman unchecked, knowing that he could turn against them at any moment? Some proposed trying to banish him, using what little they had learned from the ancient texts. But that idea was quickly dismissed. No one wanted to provoke him. Others suggested letting him continue as he was, hoping that he would eventually fade away, his purpose fulfilled. But no one knew if that would ever happen. In the midst of these debates, the horseman made his presence felt once again. Without warning, he appeared at one of the remaining human settlements, standing silently at the edge of the encampment. The people were terrified. He made no move to attack, but his mere presence was enough to send waves of panic through the survivors. Some tried to approach him, to speak to him, but he gave no response. He was a figure of myth, a force of destruction, and now he was standing at their doorstep. The leaders scrambled to respond. Was this a sign? A warning? Or was the horseman simply observing, waiting for something? No one knew. The uncertainty gnawed at them. They had called him to save them, and he had. But now they were left with the consequences of that decision, and those consequences were becoming harder to ignore. The horseman eventually left the settlement, disappearing into the night as quietly as he had come. But the message was clear. He was still here, still watching, and whatever force bound him to the earth hadn't released him yet. The humans could only watch and wait, unsure of what their next move should be. Victory had come at a cost, and now they had to face the reality of what they had unleashed. As the days passed, the question on everyone's mind remained the same: was the Horseman still their protector, or had he become something else entirely?